you're not on the prayer chain, you should be. Get a hold of Nikki and get on that. It's really nice to know what's going on in our church family, be able to keep tabs on the needs of others going around. And I've really appreciated the prayer chain. Dawson is over me, my group. He's always sending me messages, and I appreciate him being a part of that. If you're not in it, you should be. It's really good to hear what's going on and to be able to carry the load. Oh, you've heard a lot about the first service. It kind of went like this. They started singing and they didn't quit. People started coming to the altar and they didn't quit. Me and Chuck were in the back making plans. What are we going to do now? What are we going to do next? We just kind of let it roll, and one thing led to another. And that was amazing. That was just one of those times I wish y'all could have been here. I don't know why God chooses to pick and choose when and how he does that. I feel like that there's a group here this morning that's very capable of having that same experience. We've got a lot of wonderful people sitting in the midst this morning, and we've got a smaller crowd, which is what we had this morning. I found a lot of times when you got your smaller crowd as a pastor, that God wanted to deal a little closer. A lot of times when you have a bunch of visitors and a great big crowd, it seemed like it was more of an outreach, if you let me go that direction. But when you have your crowd, and I know we got some visitors, and I'm glad you guys are here. Don't think I didn't notice you. I've seen several of you sneaking in, and I've never seen before. And I'm glad you're here, because I was one of you not that long ago. Well, it's getting longer now, I guess. But do you all ever trim gray hairs out of your? I do it out of my beard. Some of y'all don't have beards, but I'm constantly clipping them out. I'm like, oh man, that thing's just like wire. It won't lay down, and you can put whatever you want on it. It's not going to stay. So I'm getting older, I guess. But it all started in 1995 in February for me. That's when I really got stuff settled. I started going to church a little before that, but I remember walking into church and thinking, nobody knows me, and I don't know anybody. But I had a couple buddies drug me in, and I was more over sports than anything, and got there, and a couple of young ladies kind of got my eye, and the church seemed a little cooler, and next thing you know, the message began to reach me, and then one thing led to another, and it was February the 5th, 1995. I gave my heart to Christ, and I've never got over it. Never got over it. So if you're here this morning and you're new, don't worry about it. I still remember what it was like. Glad you're here. I wrote my sermon out, and then I rewrote my sermon out. I got all these notes. I got them notes. I got these notes. I don't know. I didn't get to walk through it in the first service. A lot of times, if you preach the first service, you get to polish your message for the second service, so to speak. You get like, oh, I don't know about that. I'm going to shave that off. Or, oh, yeah, I'm going to add this. And I didn't get that privilege this morning because I literally just yanked bits and pieces and spit them out. And I was watching the clock, trying to stuff as much as I could to get the worship team back up so they could do what needed to be done. And now that I've got some time to walk through this, first I want to say thank you for the pastoral gifts, for Pastor Appreciation Day. That was wonderful. I don't get to get up front a lot, and I started to a couple of Sundays, get up and say something, but just didn't want to interrupt. I don't want to be up here, so to speak. I love being up here, don't get me wrong, but I don't ask to be up here, and I don't try to be up here. If you see me up here, someone's either asked me to be up here or God's got his thumb in my back pushing me to be up here. So now that I got the chance, I want to say thank you for everything that you guys gave us. We've been enjoying it. There was some good cards in there, and I'm probably fatter than I was, and we've enjoyed it. And there was lots of I've got notes in my Bible that some of you wrote me, and I'm like, oh man. And I took it out of the card, and I went and found my Bible, and I was studying last night, and I seen my name on one. I opened it up. Man, that was cool. It was from Chris and Jerry. I thank you guys for it. I appreciate it. They wrote a card, and there's others I've got, but that's the one that hit me last night. I was reading it. All right. I'm going to talk about some things this morning that will bother some of you. Okay, they're going to. There are some of you that got fresh wounds and life has caused, and it's going to bother you, okay? But I want you to know that at 2 o'clock this morning, I was asking God, how can I say these things with this one and this one if they show up? What am I going to do? Becky was one of them. We had our talk up here this morning. But there's some of you here this morning that I'm going to say some things, and I'm like, I know it's going to peel skin off of freshly healed things. I know that, okay? But I want you to know that I considered that. And I want you to know that I care, and it's not directed toward you, okay? If it seems like it's directed toward you, it's not, okay? Because there are some others here, possibly, that I don't know about, and that's really what I'm looking for this morning. I'm not looking for the group that I know. I'm fishing for the things I don't know. Does that make sense? Those of you that I know what you're dealing with, that's because you've been praying about it, and we've been talking about it, and we've met about it, and I know what you're dealing with. So I'm going to say things, and you're like, oh, he's kind of getting on me, or he's talking about my thing. Well, that's really not what I'm after. You're not alone in what you're dealing with, okay? Does that make sense? So if I say something that is a little bit tender, just please give me a little grace. Know this, that I used to travel in evangelism. For 5 years, I was all over, preaching all over. And sometimes preachers call evangelists in to preach things that they can't preach themselves because they would get kicked out, so to speak. And you got to get in there and deal with things. Well, I'm one of your pastors, and yet I'm going to try to dabble in a few of those things. But just know that I care, okay? I wanted to take time to give that disclaimer. Just know that I care. Thought it was a kid, just a siren. We're good. All right. So if we was to go back in the Old Testament, I think it would look something like this. Now, you're not going to find it exactly. Can I just paraphrase and tell the story like I feel it was? I mean, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm going to throw some truth in there, okay? But if I get a little out on my own and it's not in the Greek or in the Hebrew, just give me a little room, okay? Just give me a little room. My imagination goes wild. But it's something like this. I see a lady sitting at a table, just prepared a dinner. Her husband is there. You got to remember, this is in the days when polygamy was a normal culture, okay? The Bible was written over across the seas, and polygamy is a real thing over there. It's not accepted here, okay? But over there it's normal. So she sits down. The other wife sits down. I don't know how many others there were. What do you think about that, Jody? I think there'd be more murders. You think there's murders now. You think there's murders now. Imagine what it'd be like then. We'd all be scared to eat our supper, wouldn't we? There'd be poison in there. But she sits down, and the other one sits down. Here comes the man in the house, he sits down. And I see a woman who is completely satisfied. I see someone who once was jaded and once was bitter that is completely resolved. And she can look down through her past and she can see where she's been. And she hasn't forgot it, but she's overcome it. And there are still things going on in her world today that are not perfect. There's still an empty chair at the table where her son doesn't sit. But she is satisfied. And she is gratified. And she is thankful, and she is grateful, she's appreciative, and she's living in this place of contentment. And Chuck asked me to preach on gratefulness and thankfulness and what it does to affect our view and how it affects our take on life, so to speak, or maybe even our personality or our presence as we enter a room or as we enter the office or as we enter the dinner table. I don't always come home from work happy. Aaron will tell you, I'm not always perfect. I got a bad attitude sometimes. Every now and then they put me in check. Maybe I'm the one that needs the wooden spoon sometimes, so to speak. But I'm living in a place where I'm satisfied. I'm living in a place where I'm content. And I've titled this sermon, The Ground I Hold. The Ground I Hold. And it's because I've been here before and lost it years ago. But I'm here and I'm here to stay. I've built my house on this place and I'm going to remain in this place. And I'm not budging. And I see this woman, she's there, she's in the place of contentment, she's satisfied, but I see her maybe tonight as she's eating this dinner, and she's looking back through the minds. Maybe she fixed her son's favorite meal. Maybe she fixed something that her husband really loves. Maybe she even fixed something that that other wife really loves. And she sits down with a smile on her face. Because a few years back, she didn't have any children. And she was depressed. And that other lady sitting across the table made fun of her. And that other lady always made jokes because she knew the husband truly loved her more than, even though the other lady had all the kids, the husband loved the other one more. And that lady's name was Hannah. Those of you that know the story, it's in 1 Samuel. You're not going to find everything I'm talking about in there because I'm adding some, but my imagination, I just can't help but think that they had this place and they had this dinner. She's sitting there and her mind's rolling back. And do you know how she got to that day where she sat down and was able to serve and do? Do you know how she got there? It's because way back in chapter 1, there was a day she came before the priest Eli. Those of you that know the story, it said that the other wife was always making fun of her, and the husband was always trying to give her more than the other wife to comfort her. And I think some of you can understand that. She wanted a child so bad. And I know several people that want children so bad. And she would try, and she would try, and she would try, but she just could never carry a child. And it was one of those things that she was looked down upon, and in the household, the other lady there, she had all the kids, and her husband kept trying to make her feel better. Have you ever been tried to make feel better, but you just didn't want to feel better? You just wanted to feel like you felt. Have you ever been there? I've seen some of you there. Leave me alone. I just want to feel this way, right? We all get there. I've said that. So this one morning, they would go to the temple. And every year they would come down and they'd go before the priest, and the husband was always trying to do more, try to appease her. And every year her prayer was the same thing. Lord, I just want to have a son. Lord, I just want to have a child. I want to be a mother. I just want to produce. I want to be a part of this family, and I'm tired of being shamed, and I'm tired of being looked down on. And it was her heart's cry. It was huge to her. It was huge to her. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't really know what that's like. But some of you ladies know exactly what that's like. And that particular morning, they went there again, and I don't know what transpired. I don't know what all took place, but I know she went there and she was broken. And I know she knelt down before the altar that morning, early that morning, and as Eli the priest come around and was praying with people, and they were doing their sacrifices and doing all the things they do, she was there and her mouth was just a moving. And in my mind, her hands were moving. And in my mind, she might have been hitting the altar. She might have even stood up and been moving her arms. I don't know, but I think she was really into what she was doing. And I know when I get really into it, stuff starts, I talk with my hands and I talk with my shoulders and everything else. And I see Hannah there that morning just really just pressing into the altar and really seeking God. And she wasn't praying to Eli, she was praying to God. And Eli comes over and he starts rebuking her. Eli says, this lady's got to be drunk. Look at her. She's doing all this stuff and there's no noise coming out, and she's either got a really bad case of laryngitis or this lady is drunk. And he comes down there and he starts fussing at her. Now, I can't imagine walking down to an altar with somebody praying and start fussing at him, but he obviously thought she was drunk. And earlier I said, can you imagine Lexi being up here acting all crazy and drunk and Chuck being like, you drunk? What are you doing? And that's pretty much what happened. She looked up at him and she said, look, I'm not drunk. She said, my heart is broken. I am grieving here, and I have a problem. And Eli looked at her, and he said, well, I hope God. He just prayed, Lord God, answer this woman's prayer right now, right here. And he blessed her. And they got up, and they went their separate ways, right? I feel like, and this is where I'm getting out on my own, okay, so just let me get on my own. I feel like her prayer went something like this. It doesn't say this. Don't quote me on this, okay? It doesn't say this, but I feel like her prayer went something like this. Lord, I'm done. Been here year after year after year after year, and I'm done. I really want a child, and I feel like God said the same thing he said every year. I'll give you a child, but you got to give it back. I'll give you an answer to your prayer, but you got to be willing to do it my way. You got to be willing to take your hands off. You got to be willing to let me control this situation. Now, it doesn't say that, and it may not have been that way, but I've seen that type of situation be like that. And it got to the point, the reason I feel that, she even said, Lord, if you give me a son, I'll give him back to you. And she made a vow before God that if you answer this, I am done, I am broken, I'm not coming back next year doing this again, I'm not coming back next week, I'm not thinking about this anymore, this is it, this is my last ditch effort, and I'm going all in this time. I've come so close before, but today I'm going all in. And she says, if you give me a son, I'll give him back. I'll bring him back when he's older, and I'll let him be raised here in the temple, and I'll let him be a servant for you, the Most High God. If you give me something, I'm going to give it back 100%. And God said, yes, ma'am. It wasn't Eli's prayer that did that. I'm sure it didn't hurt. But it was a broken and a contrite heart. If Scripture tells us if we're broken and contrite, God will not despise our requests. He will listen to us. He will hear us. And I feel like that she made her peace there that morning. And she did. She conceived a son. Everybody that does much reading in the Bible all knows about Samuel. Samuel done some mighty things. There's some milestones set in the Bible that Samuel did. Samuel rose up and was a fierce soldier for Jesus Christ. Not out there with a sword. There was sometimes he picked up a sword and he hacked on some people when he needed to, when he got in his place in the temple. But Samuel was a mighty man. He wasn't some wimp out there that you could pay him off and he'd preach what you wanted. You know there's guys that do that? Can you imagine? Here, Chuck, here's $20. If you won't say that, I hear about, my buddies tell me about these churches where lawyers and doctors are just kind of, no, brother, if you keep going on that road, we're going to, pull our tithe. Well, you can pull your tithe. I'm pretty sure Chuck doesn't really care. We're going to preach the truth here, and that's how it's going to work. And that's the kind of guy Samuel was. If he got up, he said what he felt, and he had a relationship with God, and some of you know the story. I don't want to get caught up in him too much. We're talking about his mama. And I can see her, I think she raised her, back then they weaned him a lot older. So let's say she raised him until she was three or four, and there's some discrepancies on exactly how old he was or whatever, but she brings him back, and she gives her son back to the temple. Can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine Hunter? He comes to the altar, and you're like, okay, God, he's yours. I'm going to just let him live over here now, and we'll come see him once a year. We'll come visit him every now and then. And she made a vow, and she kept it. That very same lady is the one I'm talking about. She's living in a place where she's in contentment. I really feel like this morning that could be our story here as a group. I really feel like that there are people under the sound of my voice this morning that want to be content. Let's look at this a second. I went way out of my notes. Let's look at it. What was Hannah like before? Can you imagine her attitude? Can you imagine her face, her countenance when she went to the store? I'm sure she had good days. Everybody has good days, but I'd say she had some really bad days. You reckon she battled with depression? You reckon she battled with anxiety? You reckon she battled with some things like that? I mean, there's probably a reason Eli thought what he thought when she was down front. You ever think about that? She was not a pleasant, happy lady. Something had come in her life and sucked the joy out of it and stole the joy out of it. And you know what? That's contagious. And when you're around someone like that, you're either going to join them in their misery or you're going to try to get away from their misery. And I think she was just this person that when people get around her, like, she's so nice, but she's just hard to be around. Have you ever met ones when you walk up and like, how's today? And they're like, That's how I have her pictured. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I have her pictured. To this lady that's like, hey, Hannah, hey, guys, how you doing? There's an inner joy, and it's not some fake, guys. It's not some joke. It's not some thing, oh, look, this preacher's up front, and he's saying if you do this or you do that, you're going to end up happy, and everything's going to be great. That's not what I'm up here saying. But are you truly content this morning with where you're at? Are you truly content this morning with what's going on in your life? Now, you're going to have to ask yourself a couple questions. Why am I here? And what am I going to do about it? Let's talk about the why we're here. 2001 was a dark year for me. 2006 was a dark year for me. 2013 was a dark year for me. Them were tough years. Them were years where things in life changed me. Those were times when I had to keep my ground. Those are times when I had gained ground and maybe lost ground and had to regain it. And when I say that, I'm talking about this place of contentment. You see, I had to get to the place where whatever was causing me or whatever life was doing, I had to get to the place where I said, you know what? I've done my best and my hands are off. I've done my best and my hands are off. And I feel like sometimes as Christians, we get to those places and we feel like, you know, God's just let me down. You know, God's just, He wouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have allowed this. Have you ever had that thought? I've been lied about. Have you ever been lied about? Has your reputation ever been just chopped into pieces? Have you ever been done wrong? Have you ever been betrayed? Some of you have been through abuse in all kinds of ways, and you've become a victim to that, and it's not your fault. And you're like, how in the world is all this going on? And guys, I'm here to tell you, there's people here this morning, I know you're suffering from what I'm saying. I know that. And I was sitting down last night and I was praying about it. I was thinking about my personal walk and some of the things that I went through. And I'd be in church and I'd hear these things and I'd think, ooh, that's heavy. Ooh, that's rough. It's this pill I had to swallow. I want you to know I understand, okay? I understand what you're going through. Even if I haven't been through it, I had my own situations. Does that make sense? And I had to make some choices, guys, to walk through those situations. And I had to make some choices that if I'm going to serve God, no matter what happens in my life, then I'm just going to have to do this. And I'm going to have to get my eyes off of what's going on and get my eyes on Him. And I'm going to have to do what? I'm going to have to trust Him. This is not, hey, come and pray, tell God you're sorry, and you're going to be saved. This is a whole different level message, right? This is not fun. This is not fun to preach. This is not fun to walk through. I was reading a scripture this week. It talked about though the waters and the floods will come, and I'll call you through them. You ever been called through the fire? You ever been called through the water? He said, I won't let them overflow you, though. And He said, I'll walk through the fire with you. He didn't say you wouldn't get burned at all. He just said, I'm going to walk through that with you. It's not going to consume you. Sometimes His will calls us through some places that are tough. And sometimes evil, wicked people put us through places that are tough. Let me ask you something. What are you going to do about it? And I'm sitting there last night. It was 2 in the morning. It was like at 1:45. And I had my head laid on the table. And I said, God, how in the world can I tell people to get over it? You want to know what He said? I mean, I was weeping over you guys. And He said, if they don't, what good is it going to do them to stay there? I'm like, yeah, well, why don't you go tell them that? Because this is a little hard for me to say. And He said, no, seriously. It hit me just as clear as I was there and I was down and I was praying. And I think everybody finally went to sleep in the house. They was up late. What am I going to do? And He said, tell them. It's not going to do them any good to stay there. And He's right. He is right. I don't care if you've lost somebody. I don't care if somebody lost you. I don't care what they did to you. You're worth it. You're worth it. Jesus Christ died for you. And it might be tough, but it's not going to do you any good to stay there, church. Hannah lived there for years. And she came to an altar of prayer and she broke down and she gave God her everything. The very thing she wanted the most, she had to give it back. And she did. She gave it back. And God rewarded her. And on the other side, when she thought, there's no way that this is going to feel good. There's no way I'm going to enjoy this. But at least I'll have my little boy for 3 years. There's no way I'm going to love it afterwards. At least I can say I had him for 3 years. when he went back to the temple and Mom sat back and she seen her son doing the mighty powerful things, there was a gratitude and there was a courage and there was a hope and there was a shine that come from that she did not anticipate. And I'm here to tell you, the devil lies to us and he makes this big old billboard up of what life's going to look like. And I'm telling you guys, you got to tear through that billboard. It's fake. It's nothing but just a facade in front of you. He paints this picture and he tricks our minds of what surrender really is going to look like and what it's going to feel like. And, oh, well, this is going to be horrible, but I'm just going to do it. And then when you plow in there and that rips open, there is so much more on the other side. I know you can't see that now. I understand that you can't see that now. I couldn't see that now. If you would have told me in 2001 and 2006 and 2012, 2013 that I was going to look back in 2020 and say that was for my good, I would have said you were crazy, but I'm here, church, to tell you this morning, it was for my good. I tore through the paper. The billboard was fake. It wasn't real. And I'm on the other side now. And I'm genuinely happy. And I'm glad that I went through the things I went through. I wasn't then. And there are some things that are a little different than mine. I understand. There's going to be some parts that you're never going to get over. Okay? There's some losses out there. There are some hurts out there that you don't get over. And I understand that. Do not think I'm trying to minimize your situation. It's different than mine. Mine was a lot of betrayal and a lot of heartache. Those things you can heal. There are some things that are gone, and they're not going to get fixed. I understand that. But I do want you to know that surrender looks totally different on the other side if you get there. Okay? I'm going to ask you another thing. What good is it going to do you to stay here? If you got something going on, let's get on the other side of it. I feel like Hannah came that morning. It was her day. It was her time. And she gave her all, and she was amazed. If you could see her serving the dessert, that first night I was talking about. Setting it down for the other lady, setting it down for her husband, seeing the empty chair where Samuel had sat with nothing but a smile on her face because her son was making a difference in the world. And although there was a vacancy in her heart, she didn't get to see him a lot. I'm sure he wrote her letters, and I'm sure she wrote him letters, and I'm sure they communicated. There was a true joy down in her heart, and it come from dying at an altar one day to her desires. It come from dying out to her wishes. I got a big list up there if I was to read it. For some of you to get to the place where you can hold the ground of gratefulness, you're going to have to forgive. You're going to have to forgive people. Some of you may have to forgive the grudge you've held toward God. For some of you, you're going to need, you're bound to an addiction or a situation or a person or something. You know what I mean? Like money. It doesn't have to be a pill. Say addiction, everybody's like, oh, Lord, that. It could be other things. Be pornography. It doesn't have to be a drug. But we're bound to something. Some of you, to get to this place, you're going to have to take the steps of forgiveness. Some of you, it's going to have to be freedom. Some of you are going to have to overcome some things. There are some stones in that path that leads to the ground that I'm talking about. Those stones are called overcome. It is what it is. It's not going away. But I'm going to get over this. I choose to get over this. And I'm going to do what it takes. And you put one foot in front of the other. And you got Chuck, and you got me, and you got Tim, and you got all these awesome people. This is the most family-knit church I've ever been to in my entire life. And I've been all over the world. You guys are the tightest-knit group of people I've ever met. You got support. You can overcome. Some people, you're going to have to die out. You're going to have to surrender, I guess would be a better word. The old-timers at the church I grew up in used to talk about sanctification, and I've always wondered what it was like until I walked through those roads myself. And I'll describe it to you like I did, like this is what I did in the first service, and it's just a perfect fit for me. It worked in my mind's kind of simple, and it worked like this. There were potters that made clay vessels, and there were ironsmiths and goldsmiths, silversmiths that made vessels that were only to be used in the kingdom, worship. They were only to be used in the temple. They weren't to be set at the king's table. They weren't to be set out at the banquet halls. They weren't to be anywhere. These things were only made to be used during sacrifice and work at the temple. And they would take those vessels and they would make them as good as they could make them because they would want pride in that because it was for God, right? And then they would take this vessel and they would cleanse it and they would sanctify it. They might even anoint it or whatever. And they would sit it over on the shelves in the temple. And that vessel was for nothing else but God's use. And you know, church, I want God to pick me up in my mess. And I want Him to put me over on that shelf. And I want to be pulled off that shelf and I want to be used. I want my voice to only lift His praises. I don't want horrible things to come from my mouth. I don't want my ears to hear horrible things. I don't want my hands doing horrible things. I want this body. I want this man. I want this mind. I want these thoughts. I want this self, myself, to be dead. I want to be surrendered and I want to be set aside for His use. Does that make sense? And some of that, the only way you're going to get into that level of God's knowledge and God's worship is by getting rid of some of the trash and the junk and the sin and the hate and the harm that's been done to you, even if it's not your fault. That's not fun to preach. It's not cool. I'd much rather stand up here and make you laugh. I've done it a lot of times, and I enjoy doing it. My Billy Bob teeth go with me to every deer hunt I go on. I pop them in and take videos and act stupid out in the woods by myself. I love that. But this morning, I feel like there were some Hannahs in our midst. Oh, it may not be you couldn't have a child. Maybe it was. But you carried something in and out of this church over and over, or to other churches over and over, and it's time for you to get it up here and let it go. And I want you to know I'm here to help you do that. Because how can we serve God? And listen to this part. This is the part I really didn't get to get into this morning in the first service. How can we say we're Christians and dedicated followers of Christ if we're upset with the way He's sin in our life? Or if we're holding on to things of our past? Now, think about that for a minute. When we die and we leave our body and we stand before Him, what do you want that to look like? Seriously, what do you want that to look like? You want to show up aggravated at Him? Do you want to show up? Well, if you just did this. You gotta stop for a minute. And I know it's not fair. Don't get me wrong. I know it's not fair. But you gotta think this is God. You remember that sermon I preached a while back about doing it with a smile? Any of y'all remember that? Some of you may have been here, some of you not. That day I was driving down the road and I was kind of bummed out about some things. And I was kind of being a brat. God, I'm in this 1992 rebuilt Corolla rolling down a gravel road to go pick up kids for Sunday school. And I just sold my big 4-door Duramax. It's all leveled out and straight piped and awesome. I quit my job and I'm preaching this little church and people are giving me a hard time. Now I'm going to tell you what, that's not fair. I'm just putting down this road. And the kids I picked up like, you in a grocery getter today, ain't you? That's what they called it. The Papaw car. They affectionately knew my car as the Papaw car. Well, let me tell you what, when you're making $260 a week as a pastor, you have to drive a little Papaw car. That's what I got. And I was driving down the road one day in that car and I was like, God, I don't mind doing all this, but I just love to have a family. I'm tired of being by myself. And it seemed like I just hadn't felt my lot. I was going through a rough time with my ex. She was in a mental ward, and it was just a mess. I mean, life was a mess. And there I am, lip out. And he said, well, what if I want you to do this by yourself for a while? Yeah, what if I just need you to do this by yourself for a while? What if this is my will right now? What are you going to do about it, Si? Well, I guess I'm going to do it. Do it. I'll do it with a smile. Sure, God, thanks. How you argue with him? Just as clear. I didn't hear a voice. There was no thunder. When trees didn't shake, nothing fell off the road. The little car didn't vibrate over. But I heard it. He said, just do it with a smile. This is for me. I'm the king. I built this world. I set this place in order. I've done all these things, and I deserve it. You know what? He was right. So whatever you're dealing with this morning, what I was going to do wasn't fair. I didn't do anything to be there. Nothing. Schizophrenia doesn't pick and choose. You know what I mean? I didn't do anything to get there. I wasn't the reason that it went wrong. It wasn't my fault my wife had a medical problem that turned into something huge. And there I was. And he said, yet, can you do it with a smile? And I ask you this morning, is what you're holding on to worth it? Are you going to lay it down? What are you going to do with it? Because I really feel like, even though as rough as it may be, it's not going to do you any good to stay there. It hasn't done you any good to this point, and it's not going to do you any good to stay there. How about we give the other side of this a chance? I hope I haven't hurt anybody's feelings, and I hope I haven't stepped on your toes. Please know if this was bothering you, and I know you, it bothered me when I said it. Please know that, okay? There's a few of you in here, I know that some of the stuff I said was a little close to home, and I apologize. Okay? I'm going to ask Isaac to bring the team up. If you got something...
Thank you for joining us today. I hope through the service today that you were uplifted, encouraged, but also challenged. I hope that your heart was stirred. If you would like more information about our church, please check out our website or check us out on Facebook.